By noon, more than 300 people were tearing through my blackberry rows with 5-gallon buckets, laundry baskets, trash bags, and one blue plastic kiddie pool tied into the bed of a pickup, and every last one of them believed I had invited them. By 4 o'clock, nearly $20,000 in fruit was gone. 7 rows were crushed into the red mud, and the woman who started it all was sitting across the road under a striped patio umbrella, drinking lemonade and smiling like she'd bought a ticket to the show. What she did not know was that I had spent 20 years investigating farm losses. Every camera on my property was recording, and I decided not to stop her until she had handed me enough evidence to bury herself. My name is Caleb Mercer, and I own 7 acres of blackberries outside Hendersonville, North Carolina, where the mountains turn blue in the evening and the roads curve so hard you can meet your own taillights if you are not paying attention. I grow 3 varieties: Ouachita, Natchez, and a late-season Chester that can survive heat, rain, deer, bad pruning, and apparently organized stupidity. There are just over 3,000 plants on the property, divided into 52 rows, all of them laid out by my wife Elise at our kitchen table with graph paper, a mechanical pencil, and the kind of patience I have never possessed. Elise was an elementary school music teacher, 5'3", red hair, green eyes, and a laugh that could make a grocery store cashier forget she was tired. She used to sing old Patsy Cline songs while she tied canes to the trellis, and every time I complained about the heat, she would say, "Caleb, you are not melting. You are just becoming less impressive." She died 4 years ago after a long fight with ovarian cancer, right there in our living room, with the windows open so she could hear the rain tapping the metal roof. Our son Jonah was 13 then. He is 17 now, tall, quiet, always carrying some paperback novel in his back pocket, and he has his mother's way of looking at a person long enough to make them tell the truth by accident. After Elise died, I wanted to sell the farm. I had already called a realtor, already boxed half the kitchen, already convinced myself that leaving was practical. Jonah found the listing agreement on the counter, read it, and said, "No." Just that one word. I told him we could not keep living inside a memory. He looked out toward the rows and said, "Maybe we are not living inside it. Maybe we are taking care of it." That was the end of the sale. Before the farm, I worked as a crop loss investigator for a regional insurance company based in Asheville. I walked apple orchards after hailstorms, measured drowned cornfields, examined burned barns, and sat at tables with farmers who were too proud to admit they were scared. That job taught me that disasters rarely begin with the big thing. They begin with a missing gate chain, a strange tire track, a letter nobody answers, a complaint nobody saves. Most people start documenting after the damage is done. I learned to start before. I carried a yellow legal pad everywhere, and Elise used to joke that if heaven had an intake desk, I would ask for a receipt. The trouble started with Briarwood Ridge, a subdivision of 94 homes built along the eastern edge of my property. For years, the people there were fine. Retired couples, young families, teachers, nurses. One former Marine named Curtis, who bought 10 pounds of berries every summer and claimed half of them disappeared on the drive home. Then Denise Harrow became HOA president. Denise was 58, blonde, polished, and built like every outfit had been steamed while she was still wearing it. She carried a leather planner with her initials stamped in gold, and she spoke to adults the way a disappointed principal speaks to third graders. Her husband Grant owned a small development company in Asheville, and within 6 months of Denise taking office, people began asking whether I'd ever considered selling. The first time she approached me was at the county tax office. She looked at my boots, then my shirt, then my face, in that order, and said, "You were the berry farmer." I said, "Depends who is asking." She smiled and told me the weekend traffic for my customers was becoming a community concern. I explained that the road beside my farm belonged to the county. She said, "Roads affect everyone." I said, "So does rain, but I do not send it a violation notice." She did not laugh. 2 weeks later, I received a $200 fine for customer vehicles using HOA-controlled shoulders. The shoulder was not HOA property. I mailed her a copy of the county map and heard nothing for a month. Then came a demand for 4 years of unpaid association dues. My land had been recorded in 1958. Briarwood Ridge was built in 2011. I sent back the deed, the plat, and a note saying all future claims should be directed to council. At the time, I had no counsel. But sometimes confidence is just a suit you wear until someone stops asking questions. Denise did not stop. My roadside signs started disappearing. The first two were painted wood, handmade by Jonah. I replaced them, and those vanished too. So I mounted a trail camera across from the south gate. 3 nights later, at 1047 in the morning, it recorded a white crossover pulling onto the grass. A woman stepped out wearing a pale blue jacket with the initials DH stitched over the chest, clipped the sign from its chain, and carried it away. The license plate was blurred by rain, but the vehicle matched Denise Harrow's. I watched the footage twice, then filed it. Jonah asked why I did not confront her. I told him a person can deny an argument, but they have a harder time denying themselves on video. After that came the anonymous zoning complaint, accusing me of operating an illegal entertainment venue. The county inspector drove out expecting carnival rides and found blackberry bushes, a folding table, and Jonah reading of mice and men beside a cash box. He laughed until I showed him the earlier letters. Then he stopped laughing and told me the complaint had come from the Briarwood Community Office. Next came fines for excessive bee activity, unapproved crop height, visual disorder, and one especially created violation for agricultural odors drifting into a residential view corridor. That last one referred to manure from a farm 2 miles south of me. Denise was billing me for somebody else's cow. I saved every letter. I dated every envelope. I built a binder thick enough to stun a raccoon. Then Grant Harrow came to the farm in a black pickup and offered to buy the land. He leaned against the register table and told me I could make more money in one closing than I would make in 12 years of farming. I asked whether his wife knew he was there. He said, "Denise and I see the future the same way." I told him the future needed to get back in its truck. Jonah waited until Grant left, then dropped his business card into the tip jar upside down. A week later, Denise arrived with 2 board members and announced, in front of paying customers, that my farm was operating under investigation. She claimed Briarwood had adopted a new agricultural compatibility rule covering neighboring parcels. I asked to see it. She tapped her planner and said the board will provide it when appropriate. I said, "Denise, your board cannot pass laws over land it does not own." She leaned closer and whispered, "Land changes hands every day, Mr. Mercer." That sentence stayed with me. It was not about parking bees, signs, or berries. It was about making the farm harder to keep until I became tired enough to sell. 10 days later, my friend Marlene from the feed store called and asked why I was giving away the entire crop for free. I told her I was not. She sent me a screenshot. At the top of 3 local Facebook groups was a post titled "Free Family Picking Day at Mercer Berry Farm. Owner retiring. 1 day only. No charge. No limit. Bring containers." It used a photograph of my gate, my first name, and directions straight to my driveway. The post had been published from Denise Harrow's account at 6:33 that morning, and by lunchtime, it had already been shared more than 800 times. I sat at the kitchen table staring at the screen while something cold moved through my chest, because suddenly every small thing made sense. Grant wanted the land. Denise wanted me broken. And this was not harassment anymore. This was a calculated attempt to destroy a harvest in one afternoon. Jonah stood behind me reading over my shoulder, then said, "Are we calling the sheriff?" I picked up my yellow pad, wrote down the time, and said, "Yes, but we are not closing the gate." I called Deputy Aaron Pike, a man I had known since a 2018 apple orchard fire, and asked him to open an incident report before Saturday morning so there would be a clean timestamp showing I had warned law enforcement in advance. He listened without interrupting, then said, "Caleb, do you want me to send a unit out there and shut this down before anybody steps through the gate?" I looked at the post again, the comments piling up underneath it, people bragging about bringing coolers, cousins, church groups, even a youth baseball team, and I said, "No, I want 2 units nearby, cameras running, but I need the event to happen." Aaron went quiet for a second, then said, "You understand what you are risking." I said, "I understand exactly what I am documenting." Thursday afternoon, I drove to the county records office and pulled every permit connected to Grant Harrow development. 2 hours later, I found a preliminary plan for a 46-home expansion called Briarwood East, and there it was. A neat little cul-de-sac drawn across the southern half of my property as if my deed were a temporary inconvenience. The road ended directly on a lease row, the first row my wife ever planted. Grant did not just want the farm, he'd already designed houses on it. The fake giveaway was meant to gut my harvest, break my contracts, scare away customers, and make his next offer look like mercy. Once I saw that map, anger stopped being useful. Anger makes you loud, and loud people miss details. I went home and turned the farm into a recording studio for bad decisions. I mounted 6 trail cameras around the rows, 2 cellular cameras at the main gate, one above the register, and another under the packing shed roof aimed toward the county road. Curtis, the retired Marine, loaned me a drone and agreed to fly over at noon and again at 4. I photographed every row before sunset, close shots of fruit clusters, wide shots of trellises, numbered markers, even the condition of the grass between the rows. Then I called my old insurance company and opened a potential vandalism claim. My former coworker, Dale, asked what kind of vandalism I expected. I said, the kind that arrives in minivans carrying laundry baskets. He did not laugh, but he kept the file open. Jonah helped me stake 40 laminated signs along the property line. Private farm, paid you pick, unauthorized removal is theft. Replace one every 30 feet, which meant nobody could honestly say they had not seen one unless they arrived blindfolded. I also printed receipts in triplicate, set out a price board, filled 2 coolers with water, and moved every loose tool out of public reach. I did not want somebody cutting a hand on my pruning shears and claiming I had invited them to do it. Friday evening, Jonah and I sat on the porch watching clouds gather over the ridge. He asked if I was sure. I told him no honest man is ever fully sure before he lets something bad happen on purpose. He said, Mom would have hated this. I said, your mother would have hated Denise more. He laughed, then looked down at his hands and asked what happened if we lost the whole crop. I told him, then we lose it once. Not slowly for the next 5 years. At 8:20 Saturday morning, the first car arrived. A couple from Spartanburg stepped out with 2 buckets and told me they had seen the free event online. I explained the post was false and pointed to the price board. They apologized, bought a small basket, and left. For about 10 minutes, I thought maybe reason would win. Then the traffic started. By 9, cars lined both shoulders. By 10, the driveway was jammed. The overflow field was full, and people were walking in from half a mile away. They brought paint buckets, storage tubs, cardboard boxes, garbage bags, and one man carried a plastic canoe paddle because he said he planned to pull branches closer without getting scratched. I told him that was not how blackberries worked. He told me the internet said it was free. That became the answer to everything. The internet said it was free. I stood at the gate with my clipboard and repeated the same sentence until my throat went dry. This is a paid farm. The Facebook post is fraudulent. You may stay only if you pay the listed price. Some people stopped. Most did not. A woman in a visor walked past me and said, Denise personally approved this. I asked whether Denise owned the farm. She smiled and said, she runs the neighborhood. I said, that was not my question. She kept walking. By 11:30, more than 200 people were in the rows. Children crawled under trellises. Adults stripped green fruit along with ripe berries. Someone broke the hand-washing station. A teenage boy climbed onto a support post for a photograph and snapped the crosswire loose, dropping nearly 30 feet of canes into the dirt. His father looked at me and said, kids, Ryu. I wrote down his plate number. At noon, Curtis flew the first drone pass. From above, the farm looked like an anthill kicked open. People moved between the rows in every direction, carrying dark purple buckets back toward their vehicles. Across the road, under a striped umbrella, Denise and Grant sat in lawn chairs beside a pitcher of lemonade. Denise wore white sunglasses and held binoculars in her lap. When the drone passed over, she waved. Grant raised his cup. Jonas saw them and started toward the road. I caught his arm and said, no. He said, they are laughing at Mom's farm. I told him, let them laugh where the camera can see them. That was the hardest sentence I said all day. Around 1, a local reporter named Celia Monroe arrived from the Mountain County Ledger. I had called her the night before and told her there might be a public interest story, but I had not explained much. She stepped through the gate, looked at the crowd, looked at the warning signs, then looked at Denise across the road and said, you are not exaggerating. I handed her a copy of the Facebook post and told her she was free to interview anyone who agreed. Over the next 90 minutes, she spoke with 27 people. 23 said they came because Denise had advertised the event. 7 said she had commented personally beneath their questions. 3 said she told him to bring friends because the owner wanted everything gone before retirement. Denise had not simply posted a lie. She had managed customer service for it. At 2:15, a woman carrying 2 full storage bins approached the register and asked where the free jam was. Jonah stared at her and said, "Ma'am, you are standing in the free jam." She did not understand. I did. And despite everything, I nearly laughed. A little later, an older man named Wesley Carter came back from his truck with his bucket and a folded $20 bill. He said his daughter had shown him the post, but after hearing me warn people, he knew something was wrong. He paid, gave me his phone number, and offered to testify. He was the first. By 3:30, 17 others had done the same. One landscaping contractor returned with 4 employees and wrote a check for $800 because his crew had filled the back of his work truck. He looked sick when he realized what had happened. I gave him a receipt, took the names of his workers, and thanked him for doing the decent thing after being deceived. Not everybody was decent. One woman screamed that I was trying to change the rules after the event started. A man in a camouflage cap told me farmers received government money anyway. Another said I should be grateful for the publicity. I asked him whether he would be grateful if 400 strangers emptied his refrigerator and posted photographs of the kitchen. He called me dramatic, then carried out another bucket. At 4, the second drone pass captured Denise lifting her glass toward the farm while Grant pointed at Elise Rowe. By then, the crowd had stripped almost everything. The air smelled like crushed leaves, hot fruit, sweat, and red clay. Broken canes lay across the paths. Berries were mashed into the mud until the ground looked bruised. When the last vehicles finally began leaving, Jonah and I walked the rows in silence. 44 of 52 rows had been picked nearly clean. 9 had structural damage. Elise Row had been flattened, where people crossed through it to reach the parking field. Jonah knelt beside the wooden marker bearing his mother's name and touched a snapped cane with both hands. He did not cry at first. He just said, "They knew." I said, "Some of them did." Then he looked across the road at Denise folding her umbrella and said, "She definitely did." That was when the tears came. I sat beside him in the dirt and let him cry against my shoulder the way he had not since the funeral. After a while, I told him the crop was gone. But the farm was not, and neither was the truth. That night, long after Jonah went to bed, I sat at the kitchen table with 3 cups of cold coffee and built a file. I downloaded every camera clip, every drone pass, every witness statement, every photograph, every plate number, and every screenshot Marlene had saved. The original post had been shared more than 1,300 times. Denise had edited it twice, answered comments for 14 hours, and pinned it using administrator privileges. Grant's account had shared it into 2 development groups with the message, "Great community turnout expected." At 1:14 in the morning, I found the piece that changed everything. A private comment Denise had accidentally left visible beneath the original post before deleting it. "Do not worry about the farmer. By next month, he will be ready to sell." Marlene had captured it 12 minutes before it vanished. I printed the screenshot, placed it beside Grant's subdivision map, and for the first time all day, I smiled. Sunday morning, I walked every row with a measuring tape, a camera, and the same loss forms I had used for 20 years. I counted broken canes, damaged trellises, missing fruit, crushed irrigation lines, and the places where tires had cut through the wet ground. The harvest loss came to $19,400. Future yield damage added another $6,800. Repairs, labor, and replacement plants brought the total to $31,200. I signed the report, dated every page, and attached photographs taken before and after the crowd arrived. Monday morning, I carried 2 binders into the district attorney's office. The assistant prosecutor assigned to the case was a woman named Rosa Bennett, whose family had grown apples outside Waynesville for 3 generations. She read the Facebook screenshots, Grant's development map, Denise's deleted comment, and the witness statements without saying much. Then she leaned back and asked, "Mr. Poffers, Mercer, did you ever give anyone permission to remove fruit without payment?" I said no. "Did you warn the people who entered?" Repeatedly. "Did Mrs. Harrow know the announcement was false?" I slid the photograph of Denise raising her lemonade toward the drone across the desk and said, "I believe she enjoyed knowing." Rosa looked at the photograph for several seconds. then smiled in a way that made me glad I was sitting on her side of the table. She told me not to contact Denise or Grant, not to discuss the evidence publicly, and not to remove the warning signs. She said people like Denise often become most useful when they believe they have won. Rosa was right. Tuesday morning, Denise posted another announcement. Due to the tremendous success of the first event, she wrote, Mercer Berry Farm would host a second free picking day the following Saturday. She claimed she had spoken directly with me and that I was grateful for the community support. By 8:15, Marlene had already captured the post, the comments, and Denise's replies. One woman asked whether the farmer was truly retiring. Denise answered, absolutely. He's finally accepting that residential progress is best for everyone. Jonah read that sentence over my shoulder and said, she really cannot stop. I told him that some people mistake silence for surrender, and once they do, they begin confessing just to fill the space. Wednesday afternoon, Denise drove onto the farm with 3 HOA board members while I was at the hardware store. The gate camera recorded her cutting one of my warning signs from the fence, walking through the damaged rows, and leaving a tight notice on my porch that declared the property unsafe and subject to community control. She looked directly into the camera twice. On the second look, she adjusted her hair. That evening, a Briarwood resident named Morna Bell called me. She said she had been at Denise's house the night before the first picking event and had heard Grant say that one ruined season would soften me up. Lorna had laughed at the time because she thought it was a joke. After seeing the farm, she no longer thought anything about it was funny. She signed a sworn statement at my kitchen table the next morning. Jonah made coffee. Lorna cried before she finished. By Friday, a grand jury had been convened. Denise was indicted on felony solicitation, conspiracy, organized agricultural theft, trespass, and filing a false electronic notice. Grant was indicted on conspiracy and attempted fraud tied to the development plan. Their attorney called Rosa's office before lunch asking whether the arrest could be arranged privately. Rosa declined. That evening, the county commission held its monthly meeting at the old courthouse. The chamber held 120 people, but more than 200 showed up. Some stood along the walls. Others watched from the hallway. Celia's article had run that morning under the headline, HOA President Accused of Luring Hundreds to Strip Local Farm. 2 television crews from Asheville were stationed at the back. Denise sat in the second row wearing a cream jacket, pearls, and the expression of a woman attending someone else's hearing. Grant sat beside her with his jaw clenched. Jonah sat in the front row, straight-backed, both hands resting on his knees. When my name was called, I walked to the podium carrying one folder, not the binders. I introduced myself, introduced Jonah, and told the commission what had happened in less than 2 minutes. I said I was not there to ask them to decide guilt. The courts could do that. I was there because an HOA had claimed authority over land it did not own, and hundreds of people had trusted the title more than the man standing at the gate. I asked the county to require any homeowners association claiming jurisdiction over an agricultural parcel to file a notarized statement with the clerk showing exactly where that authority came from. I asked them to call it the Elise Mercer Farm Protection Notice. Then I placed 3 items on the clerk's desk: a flash drive containing the camera and drone footage, my loss report, and a jar of blackberry preserves made from the last undamaged row. The room went quiet. Curtis stood first. He told them he had watched Elise plant that farm and had watched Denise celebrate its destruction from a lawn chair. Marlene stood next and explained how the post had spread. Celia described the 27 people she interviewed and the repeated warnings recorded at the gate. Then the chairman asked whether Denise wished to respond. Her attorney rose and said his client declined. That was when Deputy Pike entered through the side door. He walked to Denise, bent slightly, and spoke quietly enough that only the nearest microphones caught him. Denise Harrow, you are under arrest pursuant to a grand jury indictment. Please stand and place your hands where I can see them. Her face changed slowly, like a porch light losing power. She looked at Grant. Grant looked at his attorney. Nobody looked back at her. When she stood, the planner slid from her lap and struck the floor. Papers spilled across the aisle. Violation letters, meeting notes, and a printed copy of the Briarwood East map with my property outlined in yellow. Deputy Pike picked it up, looked at the outline, and handed it to the state investigator behind him. Denise whispered, "That is privileged." The investigator said, "Not anymore." They walked her out through the side door while the entire room watched in silence. Rand was arrested before he reached the parking lot. 4 weeks later, The commission passed the Elise Mercer Farm Protection Notice unanimously. Denise eventually pleaded guilty to felony solicitation, trespass, and filing a false electronic notice. She served 45 days in county jail, received 4 years of probation, and signed a civil settlement for $74,000. Grant's company lost both development permits, and the bank withdrew financing from Briarwood East. They sold their house before winter and moved somewhere outside Charlotte, where I assume the roads still affect everyone. My insurance claim was paid in full within 12 days. The settlement covered the damaged plants, legal expenses, and a permanent conservation easement protecting all 7 acres from residential development. The community helped us rebuild. Curtis brought tools. Marlene brought sandwiches. Morna brought 12 people from her church. We restored Elise Row first, and Jonah carved a new cedar marker that reads Elise Mercer Row. Planted with love, destroyed by greed, restored by neighbors. The next summer, recreated an hour before opening, called Community Pick. 1 bucket per household, no charge. No Facebook announcement needed. The line reached the county road before sunrise. Jonah worked the register. Curtis handed out coffee, and people told stories about Elise as though she had only stepped inside for a minute. That morning, I understood the real purpose of all those notes. Cameras, receipts, and photographs. They were not there to help me win an argument. They were there to protect what came after it. So tell me honestly, was I right to leave the gate open and let the crime become undeniable? Or should I have stopped the crowd before the first berry was taken? Put your answer in the comments. Share this story with someone dealing with fake authority. And subscribe, because sometimes justice does not arrive with shouting. Sometimes it arrives carrying a yellow legal pad.